So Trump has thrown down the gauntlet to the internet giants, the network effect monopolies that are censoring our speech. And he claims that he's going to free up our speech by making these network effect giants, in effect, common carriers. That's an old term, meaning basically that they have to operate as dispassionately and with the same kind of equanimity as the telephone service, or they will be subject to lawsuit, as are newspapers. In 1982, I wrote an essay when I was in the largest newspaper chain in America's attempt to go electronic in an experiment in Miami. This was the Knight Ridder News Service chain of newspapers, including San Jose Mercury News, the Boston Herald, and Miami Herald, and others. They were in a joint venture with AT&T, which was being broken up from its monopoly status to usher in a competitive world of common carriers, which provide a variety of different telephone services now. When the first attempts were being made to deliver news over the internet, I was determined to make sure that people could provide news to each other. This I did because of my experience at the Plato Network. The Plato Network, a far more advanced system that was developed at Control Data Corporation in conjunction with the University of Illinois Champaign-Urbana to provide ostensibly computer-based education, but which turned into the equivalent of people having Macintoshes that could have multi-user games being played worldwide, on which I developed the world's first multi-user virtual reality system called SpaceSim. From that experience, when I was given the position of chief architect by AT&T and Knight Ridder, I made sure that my architecture would support the kind of activity that we now see, or at least we were seeing up until the recent censorship took off, that brought together Americans in support of Donald Trump, bypassing the mass media. An article on Slashdot is titled, "Why Didn't the Internet Take Off in 1983?" There's a response to that by a pseudonym, Balderson, which is my non-anonymous pseudonym. Everyone knows that's who I am on Slashdot, where I copied in my 1982 essay, Videotex, Networking and the American Pioneer, a direct quote from a person with authority in the management of this new technology. Quote, "We see Videotex as, quote, we the institutions, end quote, providing, quote, you the people, end quote, with information. I wonder what our founding fathers would have thought of a statement like that." Later on in the essay, I point to what we saw with the emergence of the Trump campaign and the reaction by the media monopolies. There is a tremendous danger that careless promotion of deregulation will be dogmatically, purposefully extended to the point that there may form an unregulated monopoly over the information replicated across the nationwide Videotex network, now under development. If this happens, the prophecies of a despotic, cashless society are quite likely to become a reality. My opinion is that this nightmare will eventually be realized, but not before the American pioneers have had a chance to reach each other and organize. I base this hope on the fact that the first people to participate in the Videotex network will represent some of the most pioneering of Americans, since Videotex is a new territory. The emergence of a despotic, cashless society isn't quite here, but certainly there is a monopoly, or effective monopoly, that's appeared because of careless deregulation. And we have seen that Americans have, the American pioneers, heritage Americans, did reach each other and managed to get one last president into office before they are demographically doomed insofar as elections are concerned. So they did reach each other. And they did organize, and they did get a president, and that president is now attempting to do something about this careless deregulation that's producing a monopoly over the information. In the same essay, I discussed some of the things that can be done to deal with the problems that you encounter when you have a wide variety of information sources that are going out from a wide variety of people, many of whom may be anonymous. The question at hand is this: how do we mold the early Videotex environment so that noise is suppressed without limiting the free flow of information between customers? The first obstacle is, of course, legal. As the knights of U.S. feudalism, corporate lawyers have a penchant for finding ways of stomping out innovation and diversity in any way possible. In the case of Videotex, the attempt is to keep feudal control of information by making Videotex system ownership imply liability for information transmitted over it. For example, if a libelous communication takes place, corporate lawyers for the plaintiff will bring suit against the carrier rather than the individual responsible for the communication. The rationalizations for this clearly unreasonable and contrived position are quite numerous. Without a common carrier status, that is, without the status that the phone company enjoys, the carrier will be treading on virgin ground legally and thus be unprotected by precedent. Indeed, the stakes are high enough that the competitor could easily afford to fabricate an event ideal for the purposes of such a suit. This means the first legal precedent could be in favor of holding the carrier responsible for the communications transmitted over its network, thus forcing, or giving an excuse for, the carrier to inspect, edit, and censor all communications except perhaps simple person-to-person communication or electronic mail, quote-unquote. This in turn would put editorial control right back in the hands of the feudalists. That was a name that I gave to the central media controllers. Potential carriers' own lawyers are already hard at work worrying everyone about such a suit. They would like to win the battle against diversity before it begins. This is unlikely because Videotex is still driven by technology and therefore by pioneers. The question then becomes, how do we best protect against such, quote, legal, end quote, tactics? The answer seems to be an early emphasis on secure identification of the source of communications so that there can be no question as to the individual responsible. This would preempt an attempt to hold the carrier liable. Anonymous communications like Delphi conferencing could even be supported as long as some individual would be willing to attach his or her name to the communication before distributing it. This would be similar legally to a letters to the editor column, where a writer remains anonymous. Another measure could be to require that only individuals of legal age be allowed to author publishable communications. Yet another measure could be to require anyone who wishes to write and publish information on the network to put in writing, in an agreement separate from the standard customer agreement, that they are liable for any and all communications originating under their name on the network. This would preempt the, quote, stolen password, end quote, excuse for holding the carrier liable. Beyond the secure identification of communication sources, there is the necessity of editorial services. Not everyone is going to want to filter through everything published by everyone on the network. An infrastructure of editorial staffs is that filter. In exchange for their service, the editorial staff gets to promote their view of the world and, if they are in enough demand, charge money for access to their list of approved articles. On a Videotex network, there is little capital involved in establishing an editorial staff. All that is required is a terminal and a file on the network, which may have an intrinsic cost as low as $5 per month if it represents a publication with only about 100 articles. The rest is up to the customers. If they like a publication, they will read it. If they don't, they won't. A customer could ask to see all articles approved by staffs A or B inclusive, or only those articles approved by both A and B, etc. This sort of customer selection could involve as many editorial staffs as desired in any logical combination. An editorial staff could review other editorial staffs, as well as individual articles, forming hierarchies to handle the mass of articles that would be submitted every day. This sort of editorial mechanism would not only provide a very efficient way of filtering out poor and questionable communications without inhibiting diversity, it would add a layer of liability for publications that would further insulate carriers from liability and therefore from a monopoly over communications. In general, anything that acts to filter out bad information and that it is not under the control of the carrier acts to prevent the carrier from monopolizing the evolution of ideas on the network. In the present context, where we have social media, Twitter, Facebook, etc., what's needed is a way of making it so that you control who has access to your information for the purpose of providing competing social platforms. In other words, when you tweet something, it should become available to all platforms. Gab, Facebook, MySpace, whatever. When you put something on your Facebook page, it should become available to all platforms. Twitter, MySpace, etc. This can be done by the simple expedient of requiring that the network effect monopolies adhere to public standards, public internet protocols for the exchange of information, just as the telephone system requires that different telephone companies provide ways of exchanging telephone calls. This is not too onerous a requirement to make it so that people can have a wide variety of filters they can choose from in determining how they want to separate signal from noise. The competition should be at the filter end. The distribution should be open via open standards. There are a lot of different things we can do to make it so that people have control of which platforms have access to their information. They don't have to necessarily have all of their information shared with all platforms. But the point is that the information that a user provides to any of the platforms needs to be made available through public standards with the permission of the user. Now, is Trump going to do this? Is the FCC going to do this? I could go to a meta level about this, but I'm not going to. There are lots of different meta levels that I've dealt with in other videos and other writings over the years. There's a lot of water under the dam, but I figured I should at least put this out there. Thanks for your attention.